Ah, fall tradition. Threats of a government shutdown no one wants. It's Thursday, September 12th. I'm Jane Coaston.
And I'm Josie Duffy-Rice. And this is What a Day, the show that may not have known all the people at the VMAs last night, but is taking solace in the fact that the VMAs are older than us.
Happy 40th, VMAs. I'm sure many of you are very famous, and I'm proud of you. On today's show, House Speaker Mike Johnson delays a budget vote and a government shutdown looms. Yay! And there's a lot of weird stuff Republicans are saying post-debate. We'll get into that.
But first, it's been about a week since federal agents seized the phone of New York's police commissioner, Edward Caban, and some other top police officials. Caban is one of a few top deputies in Mayor Eric Adams' administration who are being investigated by federal authorities. And though details about this particular investigation are scant, it's not a good thing that the FBI confiscated their phones. And it's yet another brewing scandal for the NYPD, the largest, the oldest, and perhaps the most scandal-prone police department in the country.
And that's really saying something. It's also yet another scandal for Adams, who also had his phone seized by the FBI in another probe. The Adams administration has reportedly encouraged Caban to step down, though they have yet to say anything publicly. Earlier this week at a press conference, Adams tried to sidestep questions about Caban's future and whether he was guaranteed to keep his job.
I don't think anything in life is guaranteed. I would say this, when I chose Eddie, I chose him for his experience and what he brought after 30-something years of service. And so, rumors are always out there.
Rumors aren't always out there about everybody, I will just say.
Nothing in life is guaranteed.
Very true. But so far, Caban isn't budging, though the pressure is growing as the public waits for more details about why the FBI seized his phone.
And while the New York City Police Department's mission is to, quote, enhance the quality of life in New York City, something you may not have known or suspected, we know that throughout most of the NYPD's history, that mission has certainly not been a priority for all New York residents. That history is the subject of a new podcast from Crooked Media and Wondery called Empire City, the Untold Story of the NYPD. It's hosted by NYU journalism professor and activist Chenjerai Kumanyika, and over the course of 8 episodes, he tells the stories that the department would rather you not hear, from its roots in slavery to the various corruption scandals. But Kumanyika also tells the stories of the people who resisted the NYPD at every turn. I spoke with him to learn more about the podcast, and here's our conversation. Chenjerai, thank you so much for joining us on What a Day.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So your history of the NYPD starts with your dad, who was a civil rights leader in New York, and he was surveilled by the NYPD and arrested during a protest. So can you tell us how his experience with the department has shaped your own perceptions of police and of the NYPD?
Yeah, I think like a lot of, Black folks growing up in America, you realize that there's some kind of uncomfortability, which sometimes with your parents around the police, right? Like they even parents, I think, who really are sort of pro-police or believe that the police are here to keep us safe, right, they still know that it could be dangerous. And so my dad definitely had that. But when I learned about, that my dad essentially was targeted by the NYPD in over different points in the year of 1964, it was really interesting to me because most of the conversations we have about police are around, these horrific incidents of police brutality and killing, and that allows, I think, police departments to kind of cast those incidents as, this was bad training or this person deserved it. But my dad was actually the Bronx chairman of CORE, and he was protesting for things like to stop racial discrimination, and he was working with other people to stop housing discrimination and to, fight for, equal schools, right? And those are things that all of us, I think, believe in right now. And yet the NYPD literally had a whole unit that targeted not just Black people, but targeted various activists for doing that kind of work, which to me, that's democracy work, right? These are people who are trying to make America a democracy. And the NYPD had a whole unit funded by taxpayers dedicated to stop them. So for me, that was on one level, like really personal, but it was also a way I think to really start the conversation about what is this institution actually?
Right. And so you focus specifically on the NYPD. So Talk to me about how that police department is unique or similar, right, to others across the country. I mean, I feel like the NYPD is the police department, right, that we kind of identify when we think of police. So what do you see in the similarities and differences compared to the rest of the country?
Yeah, I mean, well, for one thing, the NYPD, I think, can be called the first modern police department, meaning that, around 1845, when the NYPD started, there weren't really that many police departments that had really set themselves up as like, quote unquote, professional organizations. People are getting paid. They didn't have uniforms back then, but they had badges and they were kind of like official. The first organizations, honestly, to do that stuff, though, were like down in places like Charleston and New Orleans and Virginia, and they were almost fully dedicated to like slave patrolling. But really, they, when we talk about modern police, New York was first. A lot of people think Boston was first. And looking at the first, and they're certainly the largest, that's definitely not in dispute. And in the way they're the most notorious, it's like they, you can go to Times Square and buy NYPD gear. But I think that, looking at the first and largest allows you to really look at what was kind of in the DNA of policing, right? What were the things that got this department started? What were the priorities? And how did they develop? And so the NYPD was a good way to see all those things. And I'd love to talk about them. But I would also say that the NYPD was influential. At this point in America, other places looked to the NYPD as a model of leadership. And so some of the things that came out of the NYPD spread other places as well. Absolutely.
So this first episode features Miriam Caba talking about the origins of the NYPD. For those who don't know, she's a very famous abolitionist and has talked a lot about the history of policing and how it is relevant today. So you talk about this former officer named Tobias Budno and a network of officers who made money by kidnapping free and emancipated Black residents and selling them back into slavery, right? So talk to us about why it's important to, when you begin this conversation of the NYPD, to talk about its connection to slavery.
Well, for one, I think it's important for people to understand that, slavery and the whole idea of slave patrolling wasn't just something that had happened in the South. I think when you say, for a lot of people, at least in my world, the idea that police have something to do with slave patrols is sort of not surprising, although I'm sure for much of the country that may come as a surprise. But, New York was supposed to be a free state by 1827. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that I think sometimes when people talk about problems with the police, they're cast as racial problems. And, in this country, because the idea of systemic racism has not really settled in as the dominant way of understanding racism, people just think, oh, it's just like racist or bigoted people, right? People who just have these prejudices. And what we wanted to show in Empire City is that there's actually economic priorities, right, at the heart of this. And that, in a way, Tobias Budno was like a horrible person, right? I mean, he's somebody I have no mind, I have no problem calling this dude an asshole. He was definitely an asshole. He was racist. He was all those things. But he was also incentivized, right? He was broke and there was an economic incentive built and into the NYPD. And he also lived right before the NYPD made a turn into becoming a professional department. So we start right before. What Budno's story also allows us to see is resistance. When you're going to tell a story that has to do with slavery, I was like, when I was making the show, I was like, yo, I know there's a lot of Black folks got what you call slavery fatigue. They don't want to see, another story, Right. Other folks sometimes love that. I got to say, they're like, oh, we're telling the truth. We're speaking truth to power and we're going to show the real. And then, so you get like all these kind of there's actually not that many, to be honest, compared to the other thing. But there are like some slave narratives. And I realized people want to see resistance. People want to be able to look to folks like David Ruggles and today like Miriam Caba and to Elizabeth Jennings Graham and all these people and say, what strategies did these folks use when they were clear? The police are not on our side. What strategies did they use to actually survive and make their community safe?
Well, that's something I really found fascinating about the podcast, right? Which is that the podcast kind of debunks this myth that conversations around abolition or police reform are new, right? It basically says that as long as there's been policing in America, this concept of abolition has also existed in America, right? There's been resistance to policing in America for as long as policing has existed. So tell us a little bit about Ruggles, who his story is told so well on the podcast, and talk to us about how he pushed back against this kind of scheme that Boudinot and the other kidnapping crew had.
Well, one thing, that I always like to say is when you think about that period of time, which we're talking about, the late 1820s or 1830s, I think that sometimes there's a way where people just look back and they're like, yeah, that was just slavery times. And it's kind of in black and white in a way that although we talk about slavery, people can't really feel it. But now I want you to imagine coming home and realizing that your child has been kidnapped, which happened to a kid named, I believe his name was Henry Scott, or that your wife or husband is missing and you don't even know where they are. You actually don't know that they're kidnapped. And then you come to find out that not only have they been kidnapped, but it's a gang of police officers and people with legal connections to judges. So the system, and this is at a time when the vast majority of black people don't have the right to vote. There's a few property owning black folks who can do that. So what do? How do you fight back? And David Ruggles was created an organization called the Committee of Vigilance. And, I don't want to give away all the, y'all got to listen to hear what happens. But, they form some strategies. They form legal strategies. Their media strategies are important. We got to talk to Mariam Kaba. Mariam Kaba is such a serious organizer that I kind of felt, a little shy and not silly, but just like because, trying to act like media matters. And she was like, no, I'm like a librarian. She was like, David Ruggles, had a bookstore. She's like, this matters. Media matters. The library literature work matters, and turning up when you have to matters. Doing what you got to do now. So David Ruggles offers us, and we're going to get to see in Empire City a black community who kind of figures out a way to push back. And then we also see, though, what becomes of the police department after that struggle.
So let's talk about what's happening today in New York, or this week. We have these recent raids of New York Mayor Eric Adams' administration. He's a former NYPD captain. His police commissioner, Edward Caban, is one of a few top officials who's had their phone seized by the FBI. So how do you see this kind of current moment in New York leadership fitting in to the broader picture of the NYPD and into your work, kind of laying out the history of this deeply rooted organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, there's a tendency when people cover things like this to sort of ask the default question, what went wrong? Or to say maybe when you see Edward Caban, who we know has buried, I think ProPublica did incredible reporting to find that he was burying cases that the CCRB, which is the Civilian Complaint Review Board, they go through investigations. They have an investigative process. They don't just claim things without evidence, right? I talked to, for Empire City, one of their investigators, and he laid out the process. But the problem is that this organization is, answers to the police commissioner. And we're going to talk about that later in the series. But, he was burying these cases. So he's literally stopping the process that would allow us to figure out what actually happened. And of course, before him, I just want to point out that Keishant Sewell threw out more substantiated cases than every previous police commissioner as the first black woman, for all those people who think that black cops are the answer, or cops of color. So I think this current scandal is not actually about that. I think we don't have the details, so I want to be careful what I kind of speculate on. But I heard that it might have something to do with his relative who was kind of responsible for policing some nightlife, and there might have been some kind of racket, but who knows? I mean, there's so many scandals at this point.
Right.
Honestly, what do you think, Josie? I'm curious to see what you think, because this is your area of expertise.
It to me, it reflects what we know, right? Which is police. When you are kind of part of the top brass, you start to think that the rules don't apply to you. Again, like you said, we don't really know what's happening. And it's not like the FBI is always, the beacon of truth and responsibility when it comes to policing either. But it does sort of reflect, I think, the pattern we see, right? Which is people come in, elected officials come in, and they say, we're going to get this place in order. We're going to be tough. We're going to get this place in order, and it there is always a correlation, right, between the people saying that and the people who later end up thinking that the rules don't apply to them. I mean, it's so clear to me that there's this conflation of power and responsibility with so many of these elected officials. And I mean, I got to say, to Eric Adams, I thought he was going to get in trouble with the FBI way before this. So I almost give him credit for making it as long as he did.
Lasted this long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly.
And for those, and by the way, the drop that's about to happen from Empire City on Monday, woo!
I'm so excited.
We're speaking to some of these exact things. And I think that you do see this pattern all the way up from the police commissioner. I think what you're saying is so insightful, right? It's like the tough on crime people, the people who come in wind up being the very people who wind up just being, drowning in scandals and corruption. And that's a pattern that goes all the way back, not only to the first 10 years of the NYPD, but later in the series, we're going to talk about one of the largest and first cases where a whole police department is put on trial. And you start to see that not only is this an institution that's essentially about 180 years has functioned with like scandals and corruption that are happening not even every 10 years, even more frequently than that. But not only that, but they've never reckoned with this. What other institution could continue to get funding, to have their funding grow? And right now, I mean, I like the point you made about the federal government, right? Because there's times when I'm like, man, I think the NYPD needs a consent decree. I mean, the police commissioner is under investigation. The mayor's under investigation. The mayor refuses to hold anybody accountable, right? That's one. And when you look at what's going on with Caban, I mean, we don't know what's happened, but one thing we know for sure is that the cop mayor of New York City, Mayor Adams, has made it very clear that even when somebody just said, hey, city council said, hey, you know what? Could police officers maybe just document? We're going to make this thing called the how many stops. Like when you stop people, I mean, this is not radical abolitionist work. This is like,
right.
Can you just take notes when he was like, no, he's foaming at the mouth for these people, calling them socialists, right? Right. Just because he wants them to document the work. So if you're the police commissioner, if you're a cop and you see your mayor going out, like he's not going to let anybody hold you accountable, then of course you just are like, man, I got carte blanche.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Empire City is really amazing. So Chenjerai, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Much respect for what y'all doing. What a day. Keep doing your work. And everybody go listen to Unreformed too.
Thank you.
Now let's get to some of today's top stories.
Headline. No vote today because we're in the consensus building business here in Congress with small majorities. That's what you do. That's what I've been doing since I became Speaker. We're having thoughtful conversations, family conversations within the Republican conference, and I believe we'll get there.
Fall tradition. Threats of a government shutdown no one wants. House Speaker Mike Johnson is leading family conversations with fellow Republicans while a government shutdown looms less than 3 weeks away. Johnson delayed Wednesday's vote on a 6-month government spending bill that was already friendly to the Republican agenda. But of course, none other than former President Donald Trump is meddling in the background. The bill includes a bullshit and redundant requirement that voters provide proof of citizenship before registering to vote, an issue Democrats were expected to reject because it's bullshit and redundant, and which Trump said Republicans should force a shutdown over. With the election approaching, neither party wants to be responsible for a government shutdown, but almost a dozen Republicans have said they plan to vote against the bill. Johnson has pushed the vote to next week, when I'm sure Donald Trump will be a nice, normal partner in getting things done. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in Kyiv on Wednesday. Blinken traveled to Ukraine with UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and other officials. Speaking at a joint press conference, both Lammy and Blinken indicated plans to change their government's current policies, which right now ban Ukraine from using long-range missiles provided by the U.S. and the UK to fire deep into Russia. Here's Blinken.
Just speaking for the United States, from day one, as you've heard me say, we have adjusted and adapted as needs have changed, as the battlefield has changed, and I have no doubt that we'll continue to do that as this evolves.
Also this week, Blinken commented on the Israel Defense Forces killing of U.S. Turkish citizen Ayşenur Ege. Last Friday, she was shot and killed by IDF forces during a protest in the occupied West Bank.
No one should be shot and killed for attending a protest. No one should have to put their life at risk just for freely expressing their views. In our judgment, Israeli security forces need to make some fundamental changes in the way that they operate in the West Bank, including changes to their rules of engagement.
Ege's family has criticized U.S. officials for not launching an independent investigation into her killing. Federal inspectors warned of a, quote, imminent threat to food safety at a Boar's Head plant in Virginia nearly 2 years before the deadly listeria outbreak there this summer, according to reports released by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Inspectors found rust, standing water, live insects, mold, and thick buildup of waste product on equipment, among other, even more disgusting food safety violations, and I do not want to know what those are. Despite these findings, the USDA did not take any measures to enforce penalties for these violations. The plant continued to operate until July of this year, when it became the epicenter for a listeria outbreak, which killed 9 people and hospitalized dozens more, making it the largest since 2011. Regulation of the pork processing industry was relaxed by the Trump administration in 2019. Stunning. Letting companies rely more heavily on their own workers rather than USDA inspectors to address violations.
I wish that my son, Aiden Clark, was killed by a 60-year-old white man. I bet you never thought anyone would ever say something so blunt. But if that guy killed my 11-year-old son, the incessant group of hate-spewing people would leave us alone.
That was Nathan Clark, speaking at a Springfield, Ohio City Commission meeting just about an hour before Tuesday's presidential debate, begging Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Ohio Republican Senate nominee Bernie Moreno, and Texas Representative Chip Roy to stop using the death of his son to denigrate Haitian immigrants. Aiden was killed last August after a minivan driven by a Haitian immigrant veered into oncoming traffic and struck a school bus, injuring 20 other students. Over the last few weeks, however, a host of people, including the Trump campaign, particularly online, have used the accident to attack Haitian immigrants in Springfield.
I will listen to them one more time to hear their apologies. To clear the air, my son, Aiden Clark, was not murdered. He was accidentally killed by an immigrant from Haiti. This tragedy is felt all over this community, the state, and even the nation. But don't spin this towards hate.
And that's the news. So, Josie, a thing of mine that I think about all the time is how just absolutely batshit online the right is right now. I don't mean online as in on the internet, but online as believing that online ephemera matters a lot offline. This was something you'll remember got hurled at the left a lot in 2016. But over the last 5 years, the American right wing has gotten itself locked into a cocoon of its own weirdness. And when that cocoon gets exposed to normal everyday Americans, as we saw in the debate, because if there's anyone locked in a weirdo online cocoon, it's Donald Trump, it sounds, well, nuts.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
Honestly, you remember when the internet first started and there was one boomer that sent out a lot of email forwards?
Yeah, forward, reply,
yeah,
forward.
Exactly. That's his entire Truth Social account is that. That's all. Yeah. It's dark. It's dark in there.
It's so dark. But even after the debate, the weirdest people on the internet decided to just keep going. Take Elon Musk, who manages to allegedly be one of the smartest people around, while also being the strangest and most gullible person to ever live. There is not a baffling right-wing conspiracy theory around that he will not tweet exclamation point at. And after Taylor Swift endorsed Kamala Harris on Instagram, he tweeted the following: "Fine, Taylor, you win. I will give you a child and guard your cats with my life." See, just to be absolutely clear, that's fucking gross. If a dude said that to you at a bar, you would heave a vodka tonic in his face and walk away. But right-wing influencer, former classical liberal, and noted taker of Russian money, Dave Rubin, thought he made a good point, I guess?
He's mocking, he's exposing the ridiculousness, right? It's like, Taylor Swift, you are a young, pretty girl. Do you know what the gang members from Venezuela do to young, pretty girls? It ain't pretty.
Literally every single thing that these people say reminds me of the Charlie Day meme from It's Always Sunny. It's it's just a wall of unrelated
string.
things that they're trying to connect to regular people. Just regular old people.
So I used to have this test for like online weirdness. I called it the mom test, but maybe you could call it the like partner test, or if you heard it at a bar test. If you called your mom and told her, hey, Elon Musk, the Tesla guy, just offered to impregnate Taylor Swift on the internet, would she think that was super cool and normal?
She would not.
No.
No.
And if you heard some guy tell a woman at the bar that she was real young and pretty and Venezuelans would probably love to do horrible things to her, would you think, that guy seems very cool and fun?
I would try to have him removed from the bar.
Yeah.
For her.
Yeah, you would find a bouncer and say, hey, that guy's a fucking creep.
Yeah, no.
See,
he's not properly socialized.
No. The online right is full of absolute dorks who are deeply committed to telling one another that they are not dorks, that they are right and legion and just one step away from taking power. They are not. They are dorks who hate women, who hate immigrants, who hate football and pop music and everyday Americans, who are not as deeply engrossed in the project of being hateful dorks as they are. I refuse to be, like, afraid of them, but god dang, they are so fucking weird. And Russia, maybe try to get a refund for all of that money you set Dave Rubin. You did not get your money's worth. That's all for today. If you like the show, make sure you subscribe, leave a review, don't be gross on Twitter, and tell your friends to listen.
And if you are into reading and not just the latest indictment to rock New York City Hall like me, What a Day is also a nightly newsletter, so check it out and subscribe at crooked.com/subscribe. I'm Josie Duffy Rice.
I'm Jane Coaston. Thanks for listening, and don't be creepy. Josie, I
Don't
just
be
need
creepy.
people to be less creepy.
Just like run it by someone before you tweet it.
Like,
Someone.
literally find someone on the street and be like, hey, should I tweet
Correct.
about how I want to impregnate Taylor Swift? And
Right.
they may call the cops, but
Right.
they will probably tell you to not do that.
They're going to tell you not to do that. And by the way, if you run your tweets by people on the street and they always tell you to not do it, you have bad judgment and should
It's true.
get off
It's
the
true.
internet. You
It's
got to
true.
go.
You gotta go.
It's too much.
You gotta go. Nope.
Know
No,
your
out.
skills.
No,
Twitter is
no,
not your
know
skill.
your skills. Know your arena. You know.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just not worth it. Just
It's
don't
not
do
worth
it.
it. Don't do it.